NIO delivered 29,356 vehicles in April of 2026. And for the year to date, they've done over 112,000, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But let's also focus and hone in and pause just a second and recognize that the continued dominance of the ES8 is really solidifying NIO as the premium startup in the EV space, in the battery electric vehicle space, and that is reflected by the ES8 having delivered another 13,000 plus number in April with over 100,000 total, and there's nothing else coming even close to this. So the follow up or the question that I kind of have in mind is: can we see something similar with the ES9 from NIO? More on that in just a second. But this is the total delivery volume for 2026, over 112,000. And if NIO is going to have the kind of growth and deliver the numbers that they want to, we actually need to see the numbers improve. But this is far and away the best start to a year that we've ever seen. And with refreshes and new model releases and deliveries starting even in this month of May, they have more time than historically in years past to get more deliveries out. And so, my thinking along with this is, you've got the breakdown of NIO versus Onvo versus Firefly, the three brands. But remember, Onvo and Firefly are both pretty new, especially in that Chinese market, where I'm not even sure how many Chinese folks are aware of, potential customers or consumers or users, that NIO, Onvo, Firefly they all have the same NIO DNA. And I do think that's important to continue to track. I think as more awareness overall happens just within the Chinese market, but then also globally, I think we'll see all three brands better embraced, and sales should eventually move up across all three brands. But with the Onvo L80 and the NIO ES9 slated to launch in May, the focus shifts to, and I agree with this sentiment, what can these vehicles do, these models and these sales? And here's a little more specific on the dates. The Onvo L80 has been unveiled and will start with deliveries launching on May 15th. The NIO ES9 will also be launched and delivered by the end of May. And then the refresh for the Onvo L90 has been launched with deliveries starting on May 9th. And this was at the launch for the Onvo L80. And I wanted to highlight it because the price point on this is pretty crazy. And so I'm just wondering, how well will it compete? Is it going to be recognized as having that NIO DNA? Are we at that point in the Chinese market yet? I don't know, but we'll have to keep tracking things moving forward. Also, two things that I wanted to point out, and again, a nod to, although these are new brands, Onvo and Firefly, Firefly has recorded over 50,000 cumulative deliveries. And this was as of April 28th, 2026. And then also, the original Onvo L90 has also done 50,000 cumulative deliveries. And, I was kind of playing with the numbers, looking at how long they have with the launch of the refresh of the Onvo L90, and then the launch of the Onvo L80, and the launch of the ES9 with deliveries starting in May for all three brands. They have the second half of the year. That's a lot of opportunity to generate more sales and deliveries. So coming back to now this and kind of looking at where we are, an incredibly strong start to the year with, I think, about an average of 28,000 per month on the delivery side. But cyclically and historically for NIO, the stronger months are the latter part of the year. And so with more months ahead with these deliveries, I think May is going to be fun to track, but I think June on will be even better. So, anyway, I just wanted to offer that since it's in my mind, and I wanted to cover a little bit more. Also this, and hang on for a second, I want to switch something out at the bottom of the screen, because the caption, I want to switch it quickly. And maybe I'll even switch it back in a minute, because we will talk NIO stock price here toward the end of the video. But the three major growth phases for NIO, and I identified these in about 2020, 2021. So this was my early take, but recognizing NIO as an IDE, a unicorn company like we've never seen before, and wanting to give them time. And it's hard to just put a year on something. And so I came up with these growth phases that are very important, I think, for NIO, at least in my mind. The market awareness, not only in China, but especially in China. And now that they have three brands, in my mind, that market awareness for all three brands and recognizing all three brands as having the NIO DNA is really important, because we're not going to see a true recognition of the value proposition offered by all three brands until they are recognized and until people recognize things like the advantage of not having to take on the liability of buying the battery when you can just rent it. And then NIO does the checks on the batteries as they are swapped in and out of the swap stations. There's still a lot of long-term value that I don't think is being recognized for all three of the brands. And even the two newer brands probably still not being recognized even within China, at least not at a large scale. So I think an argument can be made. It's still kind of early, but that's also why at the auto shows, when I see crowds like this, I want to highlight it and kind of remind people, hey, this is the kind of interest that for me is an acknowledgement of market awareness continuing to present. So with that, let me now switch back and we'll move on, because we did get some new data. I wanted to talk about that, but also the year to date for NIO. The sentiment is very subdued. I feel like those who are longs and true longs, I think they know what they hold, and they're not really sweating. They're just kind of wondering and waiting when it's going to go. And I think the big indicator of subdued sentiment is reflected right here. This is just the year to date, daily side and the trade volume. We've only had those couple of days with over 100 million shares traded. Now, if NIO surprises with a June reporting of the first quarter and they're close to break even or even profitable, do we see that change? That's one of the things that's kind of, in my mind. Also, we haven't seen the Trump-Xi summit. There's, nothing has happened with respect to that yet. So when will that happen? Will it continue to get pushed off as other global issues continue and maybe eventually end up weighing on the markets or creating more volatility? I don't know. But even with the very low volume, NIO has continued to move up and kind of slowly grind its way up a little bit. Again, a reminder, January 2nd, 2026, the open for NIO was $5.32. Even right now, as it's 8:33 a.m., so the market just opened, and even pre-market was kind of red. And I saw there was one article out talking about the month-on-month deliveries were down for NIO. So sort of a bearish sentiment or take. But again, with the low trade volume, I just think we're not likely to see massive moves up for the stock price until we probably see that big trade volume come back. And for me, that's going to be reflected by a 100 million plus trade volume on the daily side of things. And I think there will be a lot of those days when it's time for us to really see ignition for NIO stock. And so again, kind of circling back to my thinking on perhaps in the short term, if that's going to happen, maybe it'll happen when they report earnings, if they surprise and if folks start waking up to what this company's doing. But by and large, especially here in the West, I think there's either a blackout of coverage or folks just are not aware. And that would indicate that the market awareness globally is still very early. This is the newest data, including the FTDs. Let me zoom out. So we can see the full history. And what I'll be looking for on this side of things, so just like with the trade volume, which is the easiest indicator in my mind on the daily side of things, big trade volume, 100 million share trade volume or more, lots of days like that. And this is the kind of move that NIO made back when we had that in 2020. The other thing we saw was an obvious drop off of the FTDs for many months. And as you see over here on the right-hand side, this is the newest data we have. And even as recently as March, there was a day with over 1.5 million, I think it was, shares that couldn't be located. So if you fast forward out at least a month, plus and factor in the low trade volume, it's impossible for us to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. But I'll say I would lean a little more bullish versus bearish just because with the low trade volume and with elevated FTDs, I would think that shorts could potentially work the thing down or take it down, but they seem to be having a hard time doing that. So that's just my take. with that in mind. Also, I wanted to bring up this because the options chain and just looking at Max Payne, really, I'm more interested in looking at and less concerned about the Max Payne price point for these. But lots of people, I think, including on the institutional side, maybe trying to trade Neo. And if I just kind of look at the dates where there are a lot of volume on these, the next big one is May 15th, with you know, quite a few, several hundred thousand calls, and it's about even, about half of them in the money, half of them out of the money. Then you look ahead to this one's maybe a little more compelling just because the numbers are a lot larger. The June 18th, 2026 one, and maybe this is one that's going to be following earnings, and maybe that's why it's getting a little more juice, a little more action. I don't know, but it's just kind of curious for me to peek at things like this because if we continue to see low trade volume and kind of the subdued sentiment is the way that I'm thinking about it with respect to Neo and Neo stock. And here in the West, I think largely a clueless population that just isn't aware of the brand and maybe will remain that way until they start seeing them here in the US. So I don't know, but this is just kind of interesting data looking at where the big numbers on the volume side are, because again, with market makers potentially playing games or wanting to control stock price and that action, I would think they would have more of an interest in doing so on these days where there are a lot more options being set to expire. So, does that mean we're going to see Neo at this Max Payne price point of $5 in June of 2026? I don't know. I mean, I won't rule it out as a possibility, but the fact that Neo continues to not really go back down below, let's say the $6 even level. I mean, remember it opened the year I shared earlier at $5.32, and with low volume and with the FTDs continuing to be in play, I think anything even over 550 is bullish, frankly. But it could just be that this thing is slowly building momentum and maybe big money is quietly buying. I'm not sure. And I have no answers, really. It's just sharing the research and my thoughts along the way. But I want to do a little bit longer video, share a few different things since we had the data. And I've been a little quiet with the videos recently. If you didn't see it, I'll link it. The most recent one I dropped, I initially dropped it on Saturday, last Saturday. It was when I saw Bloomberg come out with kind of an interesting take on Chinese EVs. And then I offered my thoughts and my opinion, which I rarely do. It's actually changed, though. My view on things has changed over the years. And so I kind of referenced that. But then I also nestled some extra research and things, links down in the description. So if you haven't checked it out, I originally just released it for channel members and then made it public the following day on Sunday. So if you haven't seen it, check it out and let me know your thoughts on this or anything else. I'll see y'all again very soon.